Okay, I'll start talking in a minute, but first I do this every single time I talk now. Please put your hand up if this is the scariest aspect of midwifery for you. Yeah. Pretty much every single time it's just a massive forest of rooms. This is scary stuff. We talk a lot about whether or not students are kept away from it and how people can be exposed to it and stuff like that. Actually, this is really scary stuff no matter whether you're in it as a parent or as a professional. This is scary stuff because, let's cut through it all, we're talking about dead babies, which is hard. Okay, so that's hard for us as parents and that's hard for you as professionals. Michelle's talked a lot about resilience and self-care and things like that. And underneath all the care that you're providing for the parents, that's really important. You guys have got to find ways to look after yourselves as well, because you can't look after us if you're not looking after yourselves. So just bear that in mind all the way through. Resilience and self-care is really important. Thank you, everybody, for coming today, because I think we've talked about the need for better care and more, better training and more training, and the fact that everybody's turned up on a Saturday in the cold to have this experience today just shows that you guys want to learn about this, you want to make it better. And for all the parents in the room, that's really heartening to see you guys here wanting to make a difference and wanting to make it better. And it's a real privilege for us to be here with you to see that passion that you've got for it. So I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes, try and get us back a little bit on track. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Henry and our experiences. I'm going to tell you a little bit about why I think stuff like this is so important. Hopefully you'll take from mine and some of the other parents a bit of inspiration and some ideas about how you can go out and make a difference every single time. But I know Jackie's already covered some of the stats, but you can't have a presentation without stats in the NHS. It's like the law. So I'm going to have one side of stats, and then we'll carry on with the other stuff. This time last year, I said, what's going on here? This time last year, I spoke in Bradford, and I said 2.6 million stillbirths around the world every year. And Jackie corrected me afterwards, and she said, as she said earlier today, that's just the ones we know about. That's a huge quantity. So if we put that in context, if I stick to 20 minutes now, that's 99 stillbirths in the next 20 minutes around the world. So if we just process that for a second. 1 in every 200 in the UK, which is 10 a day with the neonatal deaths on top. I just did a quick calculation while Jackie was talking. 15 babies a day. Since our son was stillborn on the 2nd of May 2014, that's 20,715. And that's not even 4 years. So the numbers are significant. And the neonatal rates have dropped significantly. What I discovered when I looked at the stillbirth rates was that the stillbirth rate in 2014, the year that Henry died, was almost identical to the rate of 1989. So there's a lot of stuff that still needs to be done. There's a lot of stuff that's happening. There's a lot of initiatives out there, which are great. The resource needs to follow, of course. But there's lots of stuff going on, but other countries are doing it better. So pick out on some of these initiatives that Heidi's going to talk about later, that people are going to discuss over the course of today, and work out how you can implement some of this stuff within the remit that you've got, because everybody implements it on a really small level, and that builds up to making a difference on the wider level. Enough numbers, because too many stats. Before I start telling you about our experience, I want to just give you a bit of an insight into some of the things that we've heard on our journey. Not all of these relate to our personal experience. Some of these relate to friends' experiences, but from medical professionals, from friends, from work colleagues, even from immediate family members. Because I think we're here today talking about the issue of stillbirth and baby loss in a professional environment, but actually it's important to get a scale of the understanding of the challenge that society has with dealing with this issue, because people just don't know what to say and they don't know how to deal with it. And I love my mother, but she can really excel herself sometimes. And when you think she smashed it, she came out with that one as well. I do love it, I really do. But with the possible exception of the bottom one, I think all of those things are not intended to have the impact that they have. They're intended to have a very positive impact because people think that when something bad happens in someone's life, they can put a positive spin on it and everything will be okay. It's a very British mindset. Actually, that doesn't work when you're talking about baby loss because there are some things that you just can't put a positive spin on. And actually, all parents want to hear is that you're sorry for their loss and you're here for them. That's it. I'm going to wait before I go on to the next slide because somebody's taking a photo of this one. So, our journey. We found out in the autumn of 2013 that Bryony was pregnant. And we knew it wouldn't be a smooth journey with age, diabetes, and an Ilizarov frame. Who doesn't know what an Ilizarov frame is? Looks like that. She had one of those on her ankle for the whole of the pregnancy. So we knew that this wasn't going to be a routine pregnancy. But actually, it went pretty smoothly. No real dramas early on. She went off tea, which was absolutely the warning sign for the girls in her office. They knew something wasn't quite right. So we concentrated on important things that first-time parents need to concentrate on. Very hungry caterpillar outfits, rugby balls, baby grows from your rugby team, and lampshades, all the key stuff. And then it was time for the 20-week scan. I was out of the country with work, so we got the sonographer to write the sex of our baby in a little card, and Bryony kept it sealed in an envelope till I got home. And we found out it was a boy, so we needed a name. And that's my best friend from school. His name's Henry. He was killed in a car accident when we were 14. And I always knew from that kind of age that I would name my first son after him. So I rang his mum up, still in touch with her, in a really weird kind of baby equivalent of, is it all right if I marry your daughter type thing. And she was delighted, And we're talking a lot about parents today and how they cope with keeping their children's memory alive. And that phone call from me to her, even though Henry was 14 when he died, that was the same principle, because I was keeping his memory alive by naming our son after him. So she couldn't have been happy with that. So still no problems. Piece of cake. What's everybody making a fuss about, right? Antenatal classes came and went, and we had an induction date, May the 2nd at 38 weeks. Because of her diabetes, she was always going to be induced at 38 weeks. I'm going to touch really briefly, before I carry on, about antenatal classes. Heidi's going to talk a lot about safer pregnancy messaging and stuff like that. I became very aware after Henry died that we'd gone through 3 antenatal classes, one of which I spent about an hour putting a nappy on a doll, and badly. And at no point in any of those antenatal classes did anybody say to us, what about movements? Are you aware about this? Are you aware about that? Now, lots more people have Mama Academy wallets now, which is fantastic because that helps with that. But if you find yourself in a situation where you're running antenatal classes or you're involved in that, take that opportunity to reinforce some of that messaging. I get that there's a balance between wanting to inform parents and not wanting to scare them. But actually, I'd rather have been a little bit scared in those antenatal classes and for my son to be here. Yeah. So take that opportunity to reinforce those messages in a positive way, but education is the key to a lot of these things. Anyway, we carried on prioritizing. So we got the biggest bear you've ever seen. Like, literally, you've never seen such a big bear. Bryony got obsessed with these sort of mums, parents buy and sell groups on Facebook, and this woman was getting rid of this bear. I can't think why she was getting rid of it. It doesn't take up a lot of space. So I think we picked that bear up for about £15, which is an absolute bargain, really. So, and then we got a rabbit space hopper because why not? Why would you not get a rabbit space hopper? And on the final weekend of April, in the flurry of activity, we got the final touches put to Henry's room. We had a place for everything, and everything had a place. Bryony was supervising. She kept playing this, I've got this big thing on my leg, I can't help it. I had to do all the heavy lifting, let's just say. But everything was organised and everyone could... This is another reason why you need a rabbit space hopper, so that the bear can put his feet up when everything's done. And then Bryony started her maternity leave. She had a week to take it easy before the big day, the 2nd of May. And then on the 30th of April, our world was turned upside down. Bryony went into the hospital. She had a routine appointment on the Wednesday. They said, we've got you booked in for an induction on the Friday, but come in anyway. We'll just give you the quick once-over. And I was at work. I went to work as normal, my last day before I started paternity leave. I was in Macclesfield. It says 1 hour, 54 minutes there from Macclesfield to Harrogate. That's an absolute lie. Anyone that's ever been to Macclesfield knows it's the single hardest place in the world to get into or out of. Actually, I discovered when I spoke to the midwives from Lancaster the other week that there were some people in the audience from Barrow. So I have to change this now. Macclesfield is the 2nd hardest place in the world to get into or out of. Barrow is the hardest place. But I was in Macclesfield about 11 o'clock. I work in orthopaedic sales, so I was there to support a surgeon who was doing a shoulder replacement. And I pulled up into the car park. I had a call from an unknown number. In my line of work, when you get a call from an unknown number, it's a hospital. And they're just ringing up to say, where are you? Why aren't you here? We're ready to start. And it was from a hospital, but it wasn't Macclesfield. It was Harrogate. It was Bryony, and she said, you need to come home. Henry's gone. We've lost him. And you can't really compute that at that moment in time. You don't feel emotion, you just feel a void. I went into the Macclesfield Hospital in a bit of a daze. I found the theatre sister, told her what little I knew of what was going on at the time. I found the surgeon. It's this big, brash, outgoing. Orthopaedic surgeons are all brash and outgoing. It's the law. Pakistani guy, and he came around the corner and said, come on, let's go. And I said, I'm not staying. But he was using a new set of kit for the first time that day, and I spent about 5 minutes before I left just talking him through the steps of what he was going to do, making sure that he knew which implants he was going to use. And I have no idea how I managed it, if I'm honest. I've said that to the theatre sister that she knows I come and speak at these things. She said it was the most amazing composure she's ever seen, but I don't remember anything of it. I just remember doing it. The content of what I said, I don't remember. I think in my head, all I was thinking was there's an elderly woman who's about to have an operation. I just need to get that boxed off because I can't change whatever I'm going back to. I just need to get this sorted, and then I'm going to go back. Then I had a 1 hour, 54-minute drive out of Macclesfield, and then the rest of the journey back to Harrogate. The whole thing was just a blur, so I just made a string of phone calls just to try and keep my mind occupied. The first person I rang was Henry's godfather, who's another orthopaedic surgeon. He was on his way to another hospital. He was on the big roundabout. Any of you who've come over from Salford, the big roundabout on Junction 18 by Rochdale and Oldham. When I rang him, he was just coming around that roundabout, and he went round that roundabout, I think 7 or 8 times, he said, during this conversation, because he just needed to just keep going round while we were talking. Got home and found Bryony. Bryony was already at home. We went back up to the hospital, and they said, well, we've got you booked in to come in on Friday, so just come in on Friday. See you Friday. And I'm just going to touch very briefly on that period between the Wednesday afternoon when I got home, and the Friday morning. The care when we got to the hospital was fantastic, and I'll talk about that in a second. But there was a void there of about 36 hours where we were basically just told, see you Friday. And so that is something else to think about when you are supporting families in this situation. There is quite often a couple of days time lag between finding out and actually going in. And that's a really important bit to try and fill with support. As I look back on it now, we just spent 36 hours just in a tailspin. Once we got in on the Friday morning, everything was great, but for that day and a half, we were just completely on our own. And actually, that was probably the bit where that support needed to start. I'm not quite sure how, so good luck working that out. But just something to think about in terms of where parents are going before everything kicks in. But Henry's birthday would proceed as planned. See you on the 2nd of May. Our family came from all over the country, and we went into the Ferndale suite, which is Harrogate's bereavement suite, on the Friday morning. And they started the induction process. Nothing really happened until the early evening. Where are we? Bryony became really ill. She got preeclampsia, she was fitting, she was vomiting. In my memory, Amanda can maybe correct me, in my memory her blood pressure was 200 and something over 100 and something. It was off the scale. I was pretty sure that she was going to die as well. And in the one brief moment of clarity in that part of the journey, I remember taking the consultant. They'd moved Bryony to a normal delivery room. And I remember taking the consultant, Kat Johnson, back to the bereavement suite, sitting her down and saying to her, "You don't have to worry about saving my son. You just have to make sure that she doesn't die as well." And there's something in that, I think, in terms of the fact that this is a really scary aspect of bereavement, of midwifery. But actually, in a lot of ways, it's the simplest, because you strip away all the clinical stuff, and all you guys have to do is be compassionate. So it's hugely challenging, but actually, on quite a simple level, just be compassionate human beings. So anyway, everything did start to happen really quickly, from 4 centimetres at 7 o'clock to fully dilated at 8:30. They called for an anaesthetist to do an epidural. I think he was a little Filipino guy. I remember vividly, we were in this delivery room and he kind of walked in, took one look at the situation, realised he wasn't going to have time to do anything, and just walked back out again. I don't think anybody else in the room even noticed he'd come in except for me. But 5 minutes later, on nothing more than a couple of paracetamol, we met our son. Heidi's going to talk about growth restriction and stuff like that, but one thing I realised was 4:13 and a half at 38 weeks, if I'm not stealing all your lines, is really small. When I first did this talk in early 2016, I put that line up and nobody really batted an eyelid. I said that when Michelle invited me to speak at Bolton at the back end of last year, and when I put that slide up and the whole room went, So I think there's really positive aspects. The people are learning. There's an understanding now amongst professionals about some of these issues that wasn't there even 2 years ago. So there's a lot of progress being made. All these pictures came from the first evening. Amanda, is that your thumbprint? And we spent 2 days in the Ferndale suite, and we couldn't have asked to have been supported better by Sue, who's now Harrogate's bereavement midwife, and the rest of the department. We had 2 days, which is a lot more than 4 hours, but it's still not long enough to make memories, to have photos taken, to have cuddles, and then it was time to go home. Okay, I've been waiting 2 years to do this while she's been in the room, so little time out here. This is Amanda. Where are you? I can see you now. Amanda is the amazing midwife who delivered Henry. She was the first person to meet him when he came into the world. Her care was absolutely amazing, more than we could ever have asked of. She took Henry's handprints, she took his footprints, and the key, I think this is the key for us as parents, she couldn't make our pain go away. But she did everything in her power to make the experience that we were going through just a little bit easier. And when the time came, she even came to our funeral, to his funeral. And it meant the absolute world to us to know that she took her responsibility for caring for Henry as seriously as she would have done for any live baby. And we're really proud that we get to call her a friend now. But we can't ever repay what she did for us. And as my good friend David, I'm stealing everybody's lines, whose daughter Grace was stillborn the same night as Henry, said when he spoke at our conference last year, midwives live on in the hearts of parents for one of two reasons: because you were brilliant or because you weren't. That's it. And that's challenging. There's no okay in healthcare full stop, but especially in a situation like this, there's no okay. You're either brilliant or you're not. And we were very fortunate to have the most brilliant midwife I could ever have wished for. So, thank you. So, how do you prepare yourself to walk out with a memory box? How do you prepare yourself to walk out without a memory box? I don't even know. But how do you prepare yourself to walk out with a memory box but no child? You can't, really. There's nothing that you can do in that 48 hours or however long it is to prepare yourself for that. The memory box we got was the first contact we had with our angels, the first signal to us that however isolated we felt in that moment, that we weren't alone. There were people in our town that had been through this, that had gone on to do positive things to help us with our journey. Because I hadn't even contemplated this. If you'd said to me on the 29th of April, what about stillbirth? I'd have said, yeah, it probably happens in sub-Saharan Africa, or maybe it happens in the Indian subcontinent. It doesn't happen to white middle-class families from Harrogate, but it does. But it's not on people's radars. So that memory box meant the world to us because it said, you're not alone. We were inundated with flowers and cards. I don't think the florist delivery driver will ever turn up with flowers at someone's door and say, someone's popular, ever again, though. I think I ruined the guy's day when I told him why all the flowers. We actually also had a couple of Jehovah's Witnesses turned up at the door, and I said to them, I'm not really in the right place to be converted right now. And they said, oh, we're terribly sorry to hear that. Why are you not in the right place to be converted to being Jehovah's Witnesses? And I said, okay, have that. And they went, oh, we're terribly sorry to hear that. We can do gardening as well. And I said, no, just go. I went back in the house, and Bryony said to me, they offered to do gardening, and you said no? I don't think she's ever let me live that down, that I turned down 2 Jehovah's Witnesses to do our front garden for us. But planning a funeral is not on the list of things that you are expecting to be doing 2 weeks after your son was born. I have something of a military background, so I just kind of broke it down into segments and broke it down into tasks. What are we going to get the godparents to do? What are we going to get the grandparents to do? How am I going to find some orders of service? How do you go about finding orders of service for a baby's funeral? Didn't even know where to start. What are you going to have music? All these things aren't on your list. There's no chapter about this stuff in the books. Moving forward is not a straight line progression. You have good days and you have bad days. You have a couple of steps forward and you have a couple of steps back. I saw a wonderful image knocking around on social media the other day, which had on one side the lovely curve of the journey of grief, and on the other side it had the same curve, just with a line like this, and it just said my experience. And that's absolutely right, because this stuff doesn't follow a nice simple pattern. You go from there to there, back to there. It's not a straight line progression in any way. Could we have done anything differently? The cause of Henry's death and the post-mortem, we chose to have a post-mortem, that everybody does, and that's another incredibly difficult decision, and there's no right or wrong answer, was placental insufficiency. And they said, no, nobody's fault, nothing anybody could have done. And I look back on it now, and I think, well, 413 and a half at 38 weeks, what was he at 36 weeks? You know, would a Doppler test at 37 weeks have identified something? Maybe. Would the care bundle that we're going to talk about later on have saved his life? Possibly. Have I come to realize that growth restriction is something that can be picked up and intervention can take place? Yes. But actually, there's nothing good for us to come from going down that road. We can't change the situation that we're in, but what we can do is promote some of this stuff and feel hugely optimistic that the legacy of our kids is that better understanding and better standards saves lives. And actually, we can make that difference. It's not going to make a difference to our kids, but it's going to make a difference to people's kids in the future, people who aren't even going to realize that they would have been in this situation. And they're just going to carry on their lives, and that's fantastic. That's what we all want. And as a quick aside, please don't forget to ask the fathers how they're doing. I think we have this perception, we're all frightfully British, that blokes have to be strong and they shouldn't really be showing emotion because it's not the done thing, and actually they're all falling apart on the inside. And maternity in its very nature is a mother and baby thing in most conventional circumstances. Jessica's going to talk this afternoon about her experiences, and in a conventional pregnancy, in, baby, home. The dad doesn't really need to feature on your radar, particularly as a midwife. Actually, in this situation, it's very different because the fathers are falling apart as well. They weren't planning for this either. And it's really easy to overlook them, but it's also really easy to turn around and just ask them how they're doing. I spent about the next 6-12 months constantly fielding the question from people, so not just midwives, but in society, how's Bryony doing? And with the exception of the wonderful people that we met who were in a similar situation, I can count on the fingers of one hand the number of times in the first year after Henry died that anybody actually asked me how I was doing. They just wanted to ask me how my wife was doing. And that's something that's very easy to overlook, but it's also very easy to change. So people I've met through this journey talk about two separate lives. They talk about the life before you lost your child and the life after you lose your child. And the slide is just doing its own thing. Life does go back to normal, but it just becomes a new kind of normal. And that's a phrase that I've heard so many times in the last 3.5 years. Bryony's frame came off. I discovered that if you're a bloke and you just use work as a distraction, you can do all right. And we met the most kind-hearted and inspirational group of people that I could ever have wished not to meet. But boy, am I glad we met them. We became very heavily involved in our Angels, and I think we've become quite important figures in the growth that it's had in the last 3.5 years. And the observant among you will have seen pine cones dotted around the presentation. We became obsessed with pine cones when we realised Henry is buried under a pine tree. So that became our symbol for us. Parents have feathers or butterflies or robins or rainbows. Pine cones is our thing. So we started taking pine cones and leaving them everywhere because little boys love pine cones, right? So on we went into 2015. My wife doesn't do things by halves. So we were faced with a new challenge when she was diagnosed with breast cancer. We were rushed through the first stage of IVF up to the embryo storage, and she had chemo, she had surgery, she had radiotherapy. Henry's headstone went in the week before his first birthday. We absolutely wanted to get it in before his first birthday. But we wanted something a little bit different, so we settled on this owl. It's made from a stone that they dredged from a riverbed in China, and if you look really carefully, you can see that the masons actually carved a pine cone into the base of the chest there. We started putting bird feeders up in the trees behind his grave, and he has his own pet robin now called Robbie. Our Angels fundraising and awareness raising went through the roof. We became a registered charity shortly before Henry's first birthday, which makes a massive difference because you can reach out to companies and you can start to engage people. And I'm going to embarrass her now. Our chairperson, Emma Lofthouse, was the Harrogate District Volunteer of the Year for 2015, which I think is probably a real indication of the growth that we made in that year. So we went on into 2016, and we kept ourselves busy. I was really honoured to be asked by NHS England to speak at the Leeds launch of the Saving Babies' Lives Care Bundle, which we'll talk about this afternoon. It was a huge challenge, but it was a massive privilege, just like today is. And at the end of the day, they dished out Post-it notes to everybody in the room, and they asked all the professionals that were in this room to sum up the day in a single word on these Post-it notes. And bereaved parents don't get very many opportunities to feel proud. And the woman that organised it came running up to me as they were packing up, and somebody had just written the word Henry on their Post-it note. And I couldn't have been prouder with that. A week later, at the end of March, the big news, she's knocked off ongoing ankle trauma, she's knocked off a stillbirth, she's knocked off breast cancer, she's knocked off being married to me. She's literally indestructible. So we started planning the wedding. We weren't married at the time, we are now. Why would you not? So Henry's second birthday was another sad and poignant day, but it wasn't quite as raw. If this time it included closed pegs with dog hair on the trees behind to help the birds with their nests. Robbie was a big fan of that. And that wedding we started planning on the 17th of June, 12 short weeks later. We did it. It's really easy to do a wedding in 12 weeks, Natalie. Anyone says it takes 2 years needs to have a chat with my wife. And the photographer came running up to us. She's a friend of ours anyway, and she said, after the ceremony, I need your rings. Like, no. cost thousands. She disappeared out into the car park, and I thought, well, we've paid the photographer, and now she's taken her rings. We're never going to see her again. And she came back with that photo, which I think is possibly one of my favourite photos of all time now. And we had pinecone themes all the way through the wedding, which we wanted to involve Henry with it without dampening the mood of the day, so we just found that way to initiate that theme through the day, and it worked very well. The fundraising carried on. The man from the local ice cream shop raised £1,000 for our angels in a week just by not shaving. I have no idea how that happened, but it did. I got asked to do speaking engagements on question and answer panels after screenings of this amazing documentary that we're going to screen a little bit later on for you. Robbie hasn't gone anywhere. He still turns up within a couple of minutes of us arriving at Henry's grave every time. I think it's more to do with the syrup cakes than our personalities, but he has his own gang now. He has a fearless squirrel called Squirrely, and there's a load of blue tits. They don't have names. I was asked to present at the Butterfly Awards, which is an annual awards ceremony in the field of baby loss about developments in the charitable sector. And at the end of 2016, we made a really big decision. We decided that we were going to acknowledge Christmas for the first time in 3 years. One of these things for parents is there are certain things that are triggers, and some of them are really obvious, like Christmas, and some of them aren't. And for 2014 and 2015, we just cancelled Christmas. It didn't happen. But 2016, we decided we were going to acknowledge it. I'm not sure we really embraced it, but Henry did. We had a competition with our friends Tiffany and Sam, whose son would have the better decorated grave, which sounds really mental, but actually is really comforting. And what we discovered was, if you have an owl as a headstone, you can put a Christmas hat on. So obviously we won. And now, as I look back on 2017, I kind of divide our journey into two separate bits. Our journey with our son as parents and the journey that we're on as charity spokespeople, activists, call us whatever you want to call us, that are fighting to break the taboo down now. So I break it into pine cones to do with the journey that we're on, Henry's 3rd birthday. So that's my blog. I've started blogging, pineconesandstudydays.co.uk, and those are the two sections for me, pine cones and study days now. That's how I break that down into the two bits. And the photos on this are not in the right order, so I'm just going to put them all up. Henry's 3rd birthday, we received a fantastic poem from our friend Emma in Southampton, who I hadn't met at the time. Her daughter Kitty was stillborn a couple of years ago, and she's a poet, and she hadn't written any poetry since Kitty had died. And then shortly before Henry's birthday last year, she came across a pine cone on a walk to visit her daughter, and it inspired her to write this poem, and she wrote it, drew a pine cone, stuck it in a frame, put it in the post to us for his birthday, which was just unbelievable. Parents link out in this community from all over the place. His animal sanctuary continues. The robins aren't going anywhere. I actually got 3 of them in the same photo the other day. People keep sending us pine cones from all over the world. The one on the right is from the director of Still Loved, who got that in Tenerife and brought it back to us. And then there's a bit where I talk about Heidi Lachlan and how she sent us the other pine cone, which came from South Carolina. South Carolina. I'm not going to talk about her because she's here to talk about herself today, so I'm going to leave that for later. But inspiration in the baby loss community is everywhere you look, and I'm going to leave her to show you how much of an inspiration she is. I'm not going to tell you about it today. And we went for the IVF. The second half of the IVF, you have to be 2 years clear from your diagnosis. So in autumn last year, we went for the roll of the dice of these 3 little embryos that we'd had in a freezer in Leeds, and it didn't work, unfortunately. But we are off to Cyprus next month for a round of IVF with an egg donor. So everything that you've got that can be crossed, please cross it. And the other half, so study days. I started thinking about how you can build a legacy, because you can't build memories, so you have to build a legacy instead. We held the conference that has spawned today in Bradford last year, which was a fantastic success. I've had opportunities to talk about the care bundle at various parts of the country. Pete asked me to come and talk at the Mummy Star conference. If you don't know anything about Mummy Star, speak to Pete before you go home today. They're amazing. student midwives keep asking me to come and talk to them, which is nice. Salford, Sheffield, York. So the legacy thing's coming along really nicely. One of the things people talk about, oh, that's 5 Live, David. David and I spoke on we were interviewed on 5 Live Breakfast in Baby Loss Awareness Week last year, which is another big step forward in terms of society understanding about this issue. For a national news broadcast radio station to give their prime time to 2 dads to talk about the loss of their babies is massive. And it's on YouTube, on the Our Angels YouTube page, if you feel like listening to that. If you haven't heard enough of David and I by the end of today, you can hear more of us on there. So one of the things people talk about is traditions, trying to make a tradition that will provide a sense of calm and a connection to your child. I referee rugby on Saturdays, except for today. And now I pick up one of his pine cones every Saturday morning before I go off to my games. And so there's rugby clubs all over the north of England now with random pine cones just stashed in their dressing rooms. And what I found was really interesting about this is you get to find out which rugby clubs are better at cleaning their referees' dressing rooms. And I've actually brought a stash of pine cones with me today as well. So if anybody wants to take a pine cone home with them, there's a big box here. Please feel free to help yourselves. But we're not alone. Like I said, we've been helped through our grief by an inspirational community of bereaved parents at Our Angels and beyond. And it does give a lot of comfort to parents to think that wherever their child is, he's got some friends to keep him company, and that connection with parents creates a connection with the children as well, and that makes a massive difference to parents. So it's a real privilege for myself and Heidi and David and all the other speakers that are going to come up today to represent that community at events like this, and for our kids to stand up and represent everybody else's kids as well. So I just wanted to put this little slide together, which has got a few of Henry's friends on it, because we can't all stand up and do this. There aren't enough of these events for every parent to get to stand up and do this, but it's so important. And it's not going away. It happens every day. I'm not going to talk too much about Still Love because we're going to screen it later on. I'm just going to say that at Our Angels, we became aware of this film in late 2015. Raising awareness is a massive part of tackling the taboo that exists around stillbirth in society. We couldn't have been happier to find that somebody had made a full-length documentary about it. And it expresses the devastation of stillbirth far better than we could ever hope to as individuals. Quite often when I'm doing these talks, I screen the trailer at this point, but we're going to show you the whole thing, so I won't say any more about that today. So just a few quick closing thoughts, because we're running behind and everybody probably needs a coffee now. Please embrace this initiative the girls have put together today for you. Please embrace the speakers, the stall holders from the charities that are out there. Take everything that you can, squeeze every last drop of information and learning out of today, because this situation for parents is not made or broken by us, it's made or broken by you. We can only make a difference if every single one of you makes a difference on an individual level. 2.6 million is just a massive number. 3,500 in the UK a year is just a massive number. But when you break it down, it's just 3,500 families. And each of those families is going to be cared for by midwives and student midwives. So behind that statistic, there's just a lot of families. And you guys get the chance to make that difference to them each on an individual basis. So take everything that you can out of it. Stillbirth for a long time has just been thought of as just one of those things. It happens, it can't be, there's nothing you can do about it. And actually there's an understanding now that, I'm going to quote him, he's going to get upset, but the time for that has shifted. Stillbirth isn't just one of those things anymore. Stillbirths can be prevented. Babies do not have to die. any initiatives that you take on can't save Henry, they can't save Aidan or Grace, but they will save lives. The prevention initiatives that are out there will save lives if every single person in this room invests in them, and they're invested in properly by government, but on a local level, on an individual level, you can save lives. And actually, we've just said it, behind all of this, statistics dominate everything that we do in the NHS, but actually every family makes a difference. Every family matters. They're not just a number. Michelle's already said it. Reach out to charities. Wherever you've come from today, there will be a baby loss charity somewhere that will be desperate to engage with you, whether it's Our Angels or Grace in Action or Mama Academy. They're all out there. Reach out to them and engage them because they will help you do things better. And that's the two aspects. Prevention in the first place and support for the ones that you can't prevent. There's two different bits of it. I'd much rather never see another couple walk through the door of our support group. But every contribution you make in either of those aspects is making a difference to the wider cause, but also, and this image captures it perfectly for me, helping one family will not change the world. It won't. But it will change the world for that family. Every time you follow through an action on the back of today, you're not just making a small contribution to that wider cause, the greater good, reducing of stillbirth rates or improving bereavement care. You're also potentially saving a life or helping a family with a lifetime of heartbreak. And that in itself is an amazing thing. Thank you very much.